So, hi everyone. It's really nice to see all of the familiar and some new faces. For those who I've yet to meet, my name is Lindsay Burke and I am ACORN's Director of Marketing and Development. I want to thank you all for being here this evening and pushing through what seems to be the everlasting Zoom fatigue. Before we begin the presentation, I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered here and holding this virtual meeting on the unceded traditional lands of the Abenaki Nation. I ask you to join me in acknowledging and honoring with gratitude the land itself, the rivers, the mountains, the fields, the Abenaki community, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. I also want to thank Ian McSweeney and Alison Nihart, our keynote speakers this evening, for their time. And lastly, a few notes on tonight's Zoom features. We have muted everyone, and we ask that you stay muted until the end, when we'll have time for Q&A and discussion. Feel free to use the chat box during the presentation and the raise hand function when we open up to Q&A. We also invite you to change your Zoom name to include your farm, business, or organization if you wish to do so by clicking on the three dots in the upper right-hand corner of your little tile and clicking rename. This will help us understand who's in the room. If you can't figure that out, feel free to type it into the chat box, that's fine. And as you've noted, the meeting is being recorded and will be available for those not able to make it this evening. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jonathan Corcoran, one of ACORN's co-founders and the current chair of the board. Jonathan, take it away. You're muted.
All right. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to ACORN's 15th anniversary. My name is Jonathan Corcoran, and I'm one of the co-founders of ACORN, and I'm currently the chair of the board of directors of the ACORN network. Before we get started, I'd like to briefly introduce those of you who aren't familiar with ACORN to the organization. ACORN's an acronym, and it stands for the Addison County Relocalization Network, which is a mouthful, so that's why we stick with ACORN. Keeps it simple. It was first incorporated as a community organization back in 2005 to decentralize and relocalize our economy, to bring food and energy production back home. In 2009, we split into two organizations to better concentrate our efforts. The energy folks formed the ACORN Renewable Energy Cooperative, and the food folks started the ACORN Network, a 501c3 charitable organization. Our mission at the ACORN Network is to promote the growth and health of local food and agriculture in Vermont's Champlain Valley by providing support to our farmers and food producers, by engaging in food education, and by ensuring access to healthy food for all members of our community. We're a project-based community network. Over 2,000 people receive our monthly newsletter, Cultivating Connections. ACORN is managed by a small working board of 6 people. They are Charlie DiPrinzio, Annie Harlow, Al Karnatz, Emily Landenberger, and Susan Smiley. We're currently seeking 2 additional board members, so if you're interested, please contact me. Being small, we're nimble and responsive. Food touches every part of life in our community, from the soil to the table, so we work with everybody. We depend entirely on networking and collaborations with a wide range of local, regional, and statewide partners to get our work done. In the intervening years, we've organized listening sessions, collected data, ran workshops, and producer-buyer forums for our farmers, food businesses, and restaurants. We launched the Financing the Working Landscape Conference for food businesses with the Addison County Economic Development Corporation. It ran for 2 years, and it was so popular, the format traveled around the state. We hosted Matchmakers, a candidates forum on agriculture, and regional farm to school and farm to plate conferences at Middlebury College. We supported Farm to School in our preschools, elementary and high schools, and partnered with the Hannaford Career Center. We've tackled food access issues with the Hunger Council of Addison County, the Middlebury Natural Foods Co-op, HOPE, and the Charter House. And we've joined with the Addison Independent for 10 years now to publish the Champlain Valley Local Food and Farm Guide, and with the communities of Shoreham, Bristol, and Vergennes to run the annual Tour de Farms for 12 years. More recently, we collaborated with the Vermont Department of Health, Porter Medical Center, and Mountain Health to launch Farmacy, our food is medicine program, which is now in its second year. We're also working with Middlebury College students to develop a mobile app and the next iteration of the online market. 2020 has been a challenging year for ACORN, as it has been for many small organizations around our state. We had to cancel both the local food and farm guide and the Tour de Farms as a result of COVID, projects that we count on for 2/3 of our net revenue. Fortunately, we've been able to make up for some of the losses with COVID relief funds, a number of new grants for the online market, and generous donations from our supporters. I'd like to wrap up by thanking everybody for taking the time this evening to join us. If our presentation has inspired you, please donate to our annual appeal by going to our website at acornvt.org. Our goal is to raise $10,000 between now and the end of the year to get ACORN ready for 2021. I strongly believe our communities need to get more serious about building the health and capacity of our local food ecosystems. They're no longer just nice and boutique cute. They are fundamentally necessary to the health and well-being of our future. If our future is more local, which I believe it is, then taking greater care of our soils, our water, our animals, our farmers, and each other is clearly what we need to do. As Wendell Berry has said, the land, the given world, is of ultimate value, and that the caretaking of it is a matter of paramount importance. So we look forward this evening to learning more about the important work Ian and Alison are doing to help ensure long-term access to farmland by coupling community ownership and governance with good stewardship practices. With that, I pass the talking stick to Lindsay, ACORN's Director of Marketing and Development. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for the introduction. I'm going to go a little bit deeper into all of those points that Jonathan just mentioned. So hopefully it's not too repetitive, but I'm going to share my screen. And hopefully you all get to see the slideshow. Can you see the slideshow? Okay. So thank you again for being here tonight. As we're not all enjoying the physical presence of each other, I wanted to share this photo of this year's ACORN retreat, held at the Vermont Family Forest Space in Lincoln this past July. At the retreat, we were able to collectively vision how we want ACORN to move forward into the future. We identified 3 main priorities: local food communication and education, a focus on regenerative agriculture and the intersection of climate change and human health, and the need for better local food logistics and distribution. Peanuts, right? Here's an outline of how we'll be spending our time this evening. We'll highlight ACORN's 2020 programs and how the network operates, review our financial report, examine this very unique year in local food, what we envision for our future, and then we'll hear from our keynote speakers, Ian McSweeney and Alison Nihart of the Agrarian Trust and Vermont Agrarian Commons, an innovative land ownership model new to our area. We'll finish up with Q&A time and then open up for general discussion for anyone who wishes to stay on and chat. As Jonathan mentioned, ACORN is primarily a networking organization. We don't have a physical office or full-time staff. I am one of 2 part-time contractors, and our former executive director, Lynn Cole, stepped down in July once he realized how COVID would be affecting our bottom line. Our programs are only achievable because of our dedicated working board and our invaluable community partners. We see ourselves as a catalyst and incubator for new initiatives with the ability to be nimble and adapt to the current needs of the local food shed. ACORN's recently revised mission is to promote the growth and health of local food and agriculture in Vermont's Champlain Valley by providing support to our farmers and food producers, engaging in food education, and ensuring access to healthy food for all members of our community. So how do we do that? For the past 15 years, ACORN has been nimble and dynamic with its programs, shifting to respond to what's currently happening in our world. Of course, COVID affected ACORN as it did everyone else this year. Long-standing programs such as the Tour de Farms, Biking Farm Tour, the Local Food and Farm Guide, and the Producer and Buyer Forum were canceled. But new opportunities in this digital space emerged with the development of the Eat Local Vermont app and a currently being developed online market. With dedicated help from our community partners, we were able to operate the Farmacy Healthcare Shares program this year. And of course, our efforts in educating the community never stopped. We'll dig a little deeper into these programs in a few minutes. When we say we're a network, this is what we mean. Here's a list of partners past and present. Without their support, our work wouldn't be possible. To quote the Agrarian Trust, who we'll hear from shortly, our power and resilience lies in our relationships. Now a look behind the scenes. We lost 2/3 of our planned revenue this year with the cancellation of the Tour de Farms, the Local Food and Farm Guide, the Producer and Buyer Forum, and our peer-to-peer producer workshops. We were able to make up some of those lost funds with grants, a large shift from ACORN's financial strategy in previous years when we strive to grow our self-supporting projects. You'll see 2020 Pharmacy was the largest source of revenue this year, followed by the 2021 Pharmacy program, the online market, and mobile app and market development work, organizing peer-to-peer workshops. The dark blue represents ACORN's fiscal sponsorship of the Reichert Adaptive Trike program, so we don't touch that money. And here's a look at where that money is spent. As we have very little overhead costs besides our website, insurance, and CRM software that we use to send emails, most of the funding we raise went directly to project management and communications, with Pharmacy being the biggest project, followed by the development of the app and online market. We did incur expenses for the peer-to-peer workshops and the Tour de Farms before they were canceled. The green section again is related to ACORN's fiscal sponsorship of the Reichert Adaptive Trike program. And here's a look at our profit and loss to date. Highlighted in this pale yellow section, you'll see that ACORN not only did not earn the expected $18,000 from our Tour de Farms and Local Food and Farm Guide, but we actually posted a loss due to expenses incurred before the shutdown. You'll see, even though that our executive director, Lynn Cole, stepped down this year in an attempt to keep ACORN afloat, we are unfortunately projecting a net loss of $3,550 this year. So here we have a look at the highlights of the 2020 Pharmacy program. For those unfamiliar with Pharmacy, this food as medicine program connects local families who are experiencing diet-related illness and/or food insecurity with prescriptions for free CSA shares from 3 local farms. This year, we were able to provide 65 local families with 12 weeks of fresh fruits and vegetables from Firefly Fields, New Leaf Organics, and Lester Farm and Market. We shifted our logistics to ensure safe curbside delivery, and instead of offering tasty treats or samples of recipes families can make with that week's share, we included a weekly newsletter with recipes and offered a Pharmacy kitchen hangout via Zoom. Oops, wasn't ready to switch. Sorry, one second. Data from our pre and post surveys is not quite ready, but we do have some initial feedback from some of our participants. You can see here a few of the anecdotal quotes that were filled out in our exit survey, with many folks saying the program made it easier for them to eat healthy, provide better nutrition for new babies, and help with weight loss and diabetic-friendly meal planning. There's also a very sweet thank you note we received during the final week of distribution. And that's not mentioning the cookies and the treats that we got every week during distribution. It was pretty great. In order to run the Pharmacy program, we have a Pharmacy committee that is comprised of folks from the Department of Health, Porter Medical Center, the Middlebury Co-op, Rise Vermont, farmers, and the member families. This is truly a community effort. Here you see images of our COVID alternate curbside delivery location at Hannaford Career Center's North Campus. While the location worked well this year, we do hope to return to Porter Medical Center next year, if possible, to emphasize the food is medicine theme. One major adjustment we made this year was the elimination of tasty treats that were samples of food folks could make using that week's produce. And these were super popular last year. It was a really solid part of our education. So this year we trialed a casual online cooking class with local budget-friendly chef Matt Laux, an ACORN board member and Middlebury Co-op marketing education and membership assistant manager Emily Landenberger, both of whom volunteered their time. The Hannaford Career Center Glass Onion Kitchen was also offered free of charge, and we were able to have a fun, interactive evening with an intimate group of pharmacy members who called in. Check out the amazing menu and food that Matt created for us. Now, going back in time to the March shutdown, when restaurants, institutions, and farmers markets closed, ACORN wanted to help farmers and food producers fill the gaps of those lost markets. We created a pilot online farmers market with curbside delivery that ran for 5 weeks in April and May, injecting $10,000 into the local food and ag economy. Community partners, including Tandem in Bristol and Hannaford Career Center in Middlebury, offered their spaces as the aggregation and distribution points, and we had a small crew of volunteers who helped with the curbside delivery. We shut down the market once farmers markets reopened and wrote a case study with the lessons we learned, which is available on our website at acornvt.org. As we were closing down the online market, we were approached by a Middlebury College professor and 2 computer science students who were interested in creating an integrated online market platform that would include local restaurants, farms, food producers, and retail stores. ACORN signed on as a community partner to help figure out the logistics using the lessons we gleaned from our own pilot program. The Addison County Chamber of Commerce is working on the restaurant and retail side. Additionally, Amanda Landry, the co-owner of Cream Hill Stock Farm in Shoreham and a participating vendor in the online market, also offered to help ACORN figure out the logistics. We are currently working on this iteration of the market, hosting focus groups with farmers and producers, surveying the public to understand their challenges in buying local food, and meeting with other local online markets in the state to collectively mine knowledge and best practices. A separate 501c3 has been created to run the market, and ACORN serves on the board of that organization. We're hoping to launch this in spring of 2021. Around the same time this spring, a few students from Middlebury College responded to ACORN's request for help building a map-based mobile app. As we had canceled the publishing of the 2020 Local Food and Farm Guide, due to a predicted absence of advertising dollars, we saw an opportunity to use the comprehensive list of the nearly 250 farms and food producers in our region and move it online to ensure our community can continue finding local food despite the pandemic. I have been working with a dedicated team of students since May who have since formed a software development club called MidDev to ensure this relationship continues even as students graduate. The app is currently in beta testing, but I can show you a preview of it now. So just give me a second while I switch between technologies. It's loading. Hopefully. Okay, here we go. So everyone can see my phone, hopefully. Can you see the app? It's stuck. Okay. Let me try to do this again. This is worth showing.
You're doing way better than I could do.
Oh man, I don't know why it's not connecting. Okay, let's see. I tested this so many times today and it worked.
It's always like that.
Okay, one more time, and if it doesn't work, I have a backup. Let's try this. Doesn't seem to want to connect.
I think it's the Russians.
Could be. One last try.
Thinking if not politics, maybe stand-up comedy.
All right, I think it's not going to work tonight. So sorry, I had a really cool display. But I'll go back to the other screen. Are you seeing the screen? Okay, so here you see 5 screenshots that I did take just in case the technology didn't want to work. And basically how the app works, and it's really cool to see it in person. So if you want to try beta testing, email me and I'll put you in touch with the students. But you will, when you open up the app, you're shown exactly where you are in your location, and you can search moving the map around like you would in Google Maps. You can scroll up on this pull down bar below, and it'll pull up the farms that are closest to you. You can type in the search bar, say you're looking for eggs, it'll bring up the closest egg provider near you. You can go directly to their website. You can pull up directions through Google Maps or whatever map app you have on your phone. And you can also search through the filter function on the top right, and that provides not only food categories, but it also provides services and different ways of purchasing. So if you want a CSA or pick your own or directly at a farm stand, there's various different ways of finding the food that you want to get directly around, in the Champlain Valley. So I'm really sorry that technology is not working tonight. And if you are a farmer or food producer who's on the phone, who's on the call tonight, and you haven't yet reviewed your listing, please get in touch with me and make sure you do, because we want to make sure that your information is still up to date. We are working on the information that we have from last year. So the benefit of this app is that we can update the information year round, as opposed to the printed guide that we could only update once a year. Okay. So the other thing that we also recognize is there is a gap between producers who are already online and those who aren't. So as part of the online market, we will try to get as many farms online as possible with at least a Facebook page or a website. So that brings us to today and what's coming in 2021. Not knowing what the future brings, we will continue to relocalize our food system in the ways most appropriate at this time. We have signed on to be the community partner for rural Vermont's 3rd annual State House to Farmhouse event this December, an opportunity for farmers, farm workers, and legislators to build relationships and engage in rich dialogue about how policy can support the transition to a resilient and equitable agriculture that benefits all of our people, communities, and landscapes. If you are a farmer, farm worker, or legislator interested in attending, please email me. We are fundraising for the Farmacy program and hope to grow it by 40% to serve 90 families if funding allows. We would also like to extend the season with monthly pickups through December, something we had hoped to do this year. We will continue working on the online market to crack the very hard nut of local food aggregation and distribution without raising prices for eaters or cutting into margins for producers. We are considering hosting digital versions of our producer peer-to-peer workshops, creating a self-guided tour to farms, continuing the conversation on regenerative ag and soil health, and creating a farmers' climate network. This would be a space where growers can share knowledge regarding best practices for climate change mitigation and adaptation in their fields. Of course, we are still fundraising to make that happen. The president of the National Family Farm Coalition said earlier this year, "We are seeing how fragile our food system is. With the globalization and concentration of production, and a few huge processing plants. We have to go back to regional and local food systems. If you agree and value what we're doing, please consider making a donation to ACORN. Any amount, large or small, is appreciated, as you can see on the left side of the slide. Donations are accepted via PayPal on our website, acornbt.org, or by sending a check to the address listed on the slide. We have a goal of raising $10,000 by the end of the year, which we think is achievable with a community as invested in supporting our local food system as this one is. Before I hand over the virtual mic to Ian and Alison for their presentation on the Agrarian Trust and Commons, I'd like to provide a little context. I was first made aware of the Agrarian Commons at the Farm to Plate gathering last November, when I also met Alison. My interest was sparked as I see collective land ownership as one solution to the challenge young and new farmers have accessing land, especially here in Vermont. A small group of local food advocates assembled at her house for a potluck dinner a month later to talk through how this model might work in Vermont and Addison County. Of course, COVID hit a few months later and our conversation stalled. The Agrarian Trust, however, kept moving forward and created the first Agrarian Commons farm in Vermont a few months ago. Ian McSweeney is the director of the Agrarian Trust. His life's work is focused on human connection to land and food, from social work focused on developing outdoor experience-based education programs, to real estate brokerage and consulting prioritizing conservation, agriculture, and community within typical land development, to leading the Russell Foundation supporting customized approaches to farmland ownership, conservation, management, and stewardship. Ian is focused on transforming how land is owned through the innovation and development of the Agrarian Commons model. Alison Nihart is a food systems professional, community organizer, and board member of the newly formed Vermont Agrarian Commons. She has an MS in natural resources from the University of Vermont and has worked in the field of food systems since 2010. The presentation will provide background on the Agrarian Trust, context on what Agrarian Commons is and why it is needed, and share details on the Vermont Agrarian Commons and Bread and Butter Farm. Thank you again for joining us this evening. I wish everyone a healthy, peaceful winter in what will surely be a challenging few months. Ian and Alison, over to you.
Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you for having us. So grateful to be connected virtually for this time. Alison and I were going to give an overview of the Agrarian Trust and the Vermont Agrarian Commons and Bread and Butter Farms connection too, and then really spend most of the time in dialogue, answering questions you have and kind of sharing more about the model. I apologize up front. Our kind of presentation will be somewhat rushed, somewhat rich with information. Happy to share the slide deck out. This is going to be recorded. Really, want to get into the questions and dialogue and really use the presentation as a framing for that. So maybe we could start by introducing ourselves. And if you want to go first, Alison, then I'll load up the presentation and then we can go from there.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here. I remember a couple of years ago, I went to the ACORN annual meeting and it was at Otter Creek Brewery. And I wish that we were in that space or a similar space together this year. That'd be really cozy. But I'm glad that this is a venue available to us to connect anyway. So Lindsay kind of introduced me. I live in Middlebury. I have been interested in the Agrarian Commons model since I first heard about it a few years ago. And I am now a board member with the Vermont Agrarian Commons. So I'm happy to be here to share a little bit about what's going on in Vermont so far, kind of our vision for the future. And I'll also just add, I know some of you through my professional work at the University of Vermont. And since we often wear many hats and small, I just want to note that I am here in my own private capacity, not on behalf of my employer. So back to you, Ian.
Great. So thank you. So yeah, I'm Ian McSweeney. I'm the director of Agrarian Trust. I live in southern New Hampshire. My wife and I have a small farm. We've conserved the land with NRCS. We lease the land out to a certified natural vegetable farmer the trade is that our kids and us get to grow up surrounded by a farm and have the benefit of that. And the farmer benefits from access and land tenure, which is such a struggle in today's world. So as mentioned, I have a background, kind of a diverse background, focused on our connection or disconnection to land and our relationship to land. And I've been involved with the Agrarian Trust as an advisor, then board member. And then as the foundation I was running sunsetted operations, I came on to Agrarian Trust as the director. It was just about 3 years ago now. Agrarian Trust is a newer organization founded in 2015 as a 501c3 national nonprofit land trust to focus on farmland, the ownership of farmland, the transition of farmland we're in nationally and locally across the country, and who has tenure, who has equity and access to that farmland, and how that is and will shape agriculture, community, and culture as a whole going forward. So that work, really, we manifest that work by raising the issue through presentations, workshops, symposiums. There's a lot of that content on our website. We manifest that work by supporting stakeholder networks. We are engaged in variety of networks. We've founded some, we support others in collaboration. We founded a Faithlands network. Faith communities are, in aggregate, are a significant landowner across the country and across the world. They're facing similar demographic realities and wondering what they will do with the land and assets they own going forward. So really engaging them to explore, provide resources and support for how they might transition, how they might share, how they might let go of that land. Also an agrarian legal network, because much of this is based on kind of the need for legal support models and structures to guide landowners and organizations and farmers. So knowing that is important, knowing that the needs we have, we don't yet always have the structures and models available. You know, the Agrarian Legal Network is both kind of a incubation of innovative ideas and models and support for organizations, farmers, landowners across the country. And then we're involved in other networks locally and nationally as well. It really, you know, all of our work, we feel important is ownership, tenure, and equity. And all of our work is focused on that. Understanding that there's a lot of great organizations locally in Addison County and across the country that are focused on different aspects of agriculture and farmland ownership. And we don't feel the need to replicate their work. It's more, how do we collaborate with and expand beyond the work that they're focused on? And a reality is that farmers, year in and year out, identify access to land as their #1 priority. And there's really not a concerted effort or organizations that are directly addressing ownership and tenure. And the need to do that is significant because of the transition of land that's taking place. And there are models across the globe, and there's a culture of focused farmland ownership and tenure structures across Europe for the last 2 decades that's grown significantly as well. So we can, you know, look elsewhere and see models that exist and replicate those local. And that's, you know, something we need to do nationally. That's also something I've benefited from locally, that, you know, to circle back for a minute, some of my work in New Hampshire with the foundation was to learn from and replicate what's been going on in Vermont for years. So it carried forward the first ever OPAVs in New Hampshire, learning from and collaborating with Vermont Land Trust and others. So, you know, there's models that exist. What we are doing is really nothing new, but it is new in that it's not existing where we are right now in local in Vermont or across the United States. These models are so critical because farmland is at such a crisis, and you know, these are just a few points to bring up. These are all national statistics. Vermont is really a unique and supportive, healthy agricultural system in many ways. I recognize there's always a need for more money, more organizations, more support, more resources on the ground. But the reality is that, Vermont is a national leader in many ways, and many states and across the country lack a lot of the supports, resources, and community that Vermont has. But the reality that, we mid-sized farms, those are the farms that feed us. Those are the farms that we connect with each other at. Since 2012, 37 every single day are closing is significant, and we really need to do things to address these realities. And it's not just local to us in New England. There's a need to address this across the country. This map, the dark red, indicates the greatest farmland loss. And in national audiences or outside of New England, I point to the fact that how fortunate we are that pick any New England state, but any one of them has more land trusts, more financial resources, more support for agriculture and farmland conservation than all of the Southeast. And you look, the loss of farmland is, felt significantly across the country. So the need to bring equity across the country to where farmland is lost is significant. And the reality here, what this slide highlights, is that farmland appraised market value continues to increase year over year, and farm net incomes continue to decrease year over year. So the challenges in making farmland affordable and making farmland accessible for farmers is becoming more and more difficult by the year. And present realities like this pandemic, present realities like climate collapse are making that even more difficult, and why some farmers are benefiting from a increased awareness in local food and increased sales. There's other stressors on their food system and their kind of sales aggregation processing, in one way or another, that limits their ability to grow and meet the need and stretches them beyond their capacity. And this whole time, the financial pressures are significant. So as I mentioned, we are guided and inspired by many other organizations, some discrete examples that exist across the globe, some, movements that have taken place across the globe, and really to highlight something local that's of real relevance. That, something that has always struck me is the, amazing and inspirational work in Vermont by many organizations, and a reality that Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, who holds a dual mission of broader than what I'm going to describe here, but just to define it to why we're here to talk tonight, that they hold a dual mission focused on farmland conservation and affordable housing. Understanding it's more conservation than that, and it's more than described there, but the farmland conservation and affordable housing, and they disperse funds and provide supports for both, and yet they provide those out into silos of work that, Vermont Land Trust and South Burlington Community Land Trust are national leaders in what they do, and they inspire many across the country. And yet affordable housing and farmland protection are not interconnected in their funding in Vermont, which is an inspiration for the country. So, that awareness leads us to believe, and this is just one example local to all of you, but that awareness leads us to believe that, there's a need and a kind of possibility to create a hybrid between land conservation held out and carried forward by conservation land trusts and community needs carried out by community land trusts. And that's really our work, is just to create a hybrid between conservation land trust and community land trust, focused on agriculture and centered in local community. We're a national land trust, a 501c3, as I described. In this illustration, It shows Agrarian Trust, the 501c3 in the middle, on the left side. We feel as a national organization, we have certain resources and supports and assistance to provide. We also feel we shouldn't own land, we shouldn't hold equity, and we shouldn't make decisions. That's a local kind of control, that's a local authority that should exist. So there should be kind of local decision making, local communities should hold equity and hold land, and we as a national organization should bring forward the resources we do. So we as a national organization have developed localized community land trusts, these 501c2 structures. We've developed 12 now in 10 states across the country, Vermont being one of those. And those local agrarian commons, 501c2 entities, are where title to land is held and decision-making and equity is held. And those local agrarian commons are 501c2 entities for a reason. A 501c2 entity by IRS is a limited scope land holding affiliate of a 501c3 entity. So it's limited in scope to just holding land and just conveying lease or rent of that land. So it's a nonprofit landlord in many ways to hold the land, to address the financial burdens that I touched upon and we're all aware of, and to ensure a continuity that is longer than human or business life for land, because really we need to build from one generation to the next of the stewardship and care that farmers take on, and not continue to need to rebuild farms with a new generation coming forward. We need to hold them in a trust for a much longer vision. And we've known that and realized that, and farmers generationally have known that. And yet many farmers, their only exit strategy is to sell their land to pay off debts and just afford retirement. And selling the land in many cases leads to farms falling out of agriculture. It's sold to the highest bidder, and many times that removes land from production agriculture and forces new next generation farmers to start on new land and to start to build a business again. So we're continuously, for many, in this cycle of having to destroy what we've spent a lifetime building in soil and community and farm systems, only for next generation to re-engage and start that effort again. And we feel there's a better way to do that. So as mentioned, on May 1st, we incorporated 10 local agrarian commons across the country. We've since added 2 additional agrarian commons. We have 17 farms that we have agreements that we're now moving forward to transfer into those agrarian commons, and the kind of other details of those farms are shared here. These are the locations across the country. Each local agrarian commons decides their geographic scope. So some are in a much in a smaller defined region. That's a local decision. Some are statewide. Vermont Agrarian Commons and New Hampshire Agrarian Commons are statewide. These circles represent kind of the area in which they're starting with those farms mentioned. The main agrarian commons is focused on 5 counties around Lewiston, Maine. And this is kind of the breakdown of those agrarian commons and who's involved. So each agrarian commons is its own nonprofit entity connected to and affiliated with the trust. But each agrarian commons has its own board. That board is 1/3 leaseholding farmers who are part of those farms mentioned, 1/3 community stakeholders in the community, that geographic region the commons serve, and then 1/3 agrarian trust. And the kind of breakdown of the board members is mentioned here. But so that localized board creates a local vision, local priorities, and local body of work. Overall, it is guided by and supported by agrarian trust. And as agrarian trust, in the connection through this 501c2 structure is that, we agrarian trust are incorporating these entities, and they all have similar bylaws, and they all have similar founding documents. Some of them are, localized to place, like a lease, for example, or farm standards, but other things like the bylaws carry forward from one to the next. So in doing that, we can require certain things that fulfill our mission. So we can require affordability and equity building in the lease. We can require long-term secure tenure. So that differs state to state, but in Vermont, that's a 99-year lease tenure. We can require certain farming practices. So what that looks like is it's chemical-free, regenerative food production agriculture that's connected to community in different ways. And that, might look quite different from one farm to the next, but they're all upholding those standards. And new farms, as they come in, need to uphold those standards as well. And it also looks like certain stewardship standards to ensure that there's soil health and ecosystem diversity and health. And that in this model is not solely burdened on the farmer, but that is a partnership that we agrarian trusts play a role, the local agrarian commons plays a role, and other partners play a role as well. So a number of projects are partnered with USDA and FSA and NRCS for that work. A number of projects have private foundation and philanthropic support as well, because really part of it is that ownership piece that I mentioned, but part of it is also the stewardship of the ground and a shared responsibility in that. Part of it's that farming practices mentioned and a shared responsibility in that. So it's, no longer should we put all of that burden on individual farmers to shoulder the cost and time to care for the earth, grow our food, and steward our planet, that it's something we collectively have to hold, and not solely as we have in engaging in annual support for the business and food production, but a much longer term perspective that builds upon what conservation easements do and really takes an active approach to how do we actively engage and support with capital, financial capital, human capital, time capital, and other resources going forward. So a number of projects, we, the trust, raise philanthropic capital. We engage in stewardship projects on the ground to address soil regeneration, habitat diversity, renewable energy projects. And we, the trust, carry forward these principles I mentioned before. So this kind of summarizes what I was talking about. And all these are embodied in all the farms, and they look quite different. Our smallest farm we're working with is a 13-acre vegetable farm, small-scale vegetable fruit production farm on Whidbey Island in Washington. The largest farm we're working with is a 8,500-acre regenerative organic grain and crop farm in Montana. So now to the Vermont Agrarian Commons, and I'll pass it off to Alison now to share some of the Vermont Agrarian Commons, and I'll continue to cue the slides forward. So Alison, just let me know as you want me to move things forward.
Thanks, Ian. Just going to navigate so I can see my notes. All right, so as Ian mentioned, the Vermont Agrarian Commons was one of the 10 that were incorporated in May, so we're still a relatively young organization. And this is an image of what I kind of think of as the Vermont Agrarian Commons ecosystem. It is, a network of stakeholders who are supporting the commons, who are the Commons Board, the farmers who are involved, the land itself, and the communities surrounding it. So we are launching with Bread and Butter Farm in South Burlington, and they are, helping us bring our first land parcels into the commons. The long-term vision is that we will expect to expand to other parcels and rent to other farm enterprises in the future. And there are even a few potential land gifts on the horizon. For now, Bread and Butter Farm is really our focus because, as you'll hear shortly, we're kicking off a large fundraising campaign that is going to help us get those lands into the commons ownership. Next slide. So many of you may know Bread and Butter Farm. They're a pretty established farm. They're a diversified farm located in South Burlington. Corey Pierce is the owner and the lead farmer there. Brandon Bless is the land and animal manager. And they are practicing regenerative agriculture in a variety of ways, including grass-fed beef, organic vegetables, poultry, pork, eggs, raw milk, fruit, and they're practicing conservation practices like no-till and cover cropping. But Bread and Butter doesn't just produce food, it also produces community. Some of you may have been to their community events. They're well known for their burger nights, which happen in the summer under normal circumstances. Sadly, they were not able to happen this year. And they support a variety of other enterprises at the farm, including a bakery, Blank Page Cafe, the Village School, Music for Sprouts, which is run by Corey's partner, Chris. They have summer camps and a partnership with the UVM Farmer Training Program. The farm business has a 300-member CSA, and they have a farm store on site. So they're really building a lot in addition to the soil and in addition to the food that they're growing there. Next slide. So this is the land that will comprise the project with Bread and Butter Farm that's coming into the Vermont Agrarian Commons. Bread and Butter had a land acquisition project in the works that Corey and Brandon were working on, and they learned about the Agrarian Commons model, I think about a year ago, and they were really excited because it felt like a good fit to them for their long-term vision for what the land could be and what Bread and Butter's relationship to the land could be. So there is some existing land that's owned by Corey, and then there are some new parcels that make up about 375 acres. And those are currently in ownership with Vermont Land Trust and Dirt Capital and other investment partners. And there's a partnership with Vermont Housing Conservation Board, the Vermont Land Trust. There's support from the City of South Burlington. And once purchased, the total farmland will be about 519 acres, and all of that land will be held by the Vermont Agrarian Commons. In addition to the farm business and other enterprises on the site, there are expected to be about 6 to 12 housing sites for the farm community and recreational trails. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we as a board are kicking off a fundraising campaign, and this is really, kind of we're thinking of it as phased in, but there already have been some significant fundraising phases that have happened to date that have already brought a lot of resources to the project to make it possible. But our goal is to raise 2.1 million, and that's kind of broken down into these phases that you see on the screen. So that 1 million by next March will make it possible to do the first iteration of the land transfer. Some of the funding partners, as I mentioned before, are the City of South Burlington, Dirt Capital, NRCS, South Burlington Land Trust, and the conservation easements are held by Vermont Land Trust and the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, and those are really critical to the affordability of the land. So at this point, we are beginning conversations with donors. If you know someone who might be interested in supporting this project, please let us know, be in touch with Ian or myself. We're starting with donors who are capable of providing larger contributions, but we'll also have a community scale fundraiser. We'll be raising money from the community at large in a few months down the road. So keep your eyes open for that. And next slide, I think, is the last one with some contact information for us. So I think that we are able to take some questions. Lindsay, I don't know if you want to facilitate or just have people speak up.
Yeah, people can either chat their questions into the chat box. They can, use the raise hand function if they know how to use that, or they can just unmute themselves and ask questions. It's pretty casual. Does anybody have any questions for Alison or Ian?
Well, to get us started, Lindsay, I can pose a question to Ian that I know often comes up for folks who are thinking about how this works for the farm enterprises over the long term. And the question that often comes up is how does the enterprise build equity? Often farmers are really reliant on the land as a way to have equity in the business. And Ian, I wonder if you could speak a little bit to that and what are the mechanisms that this model can support for that same function.
Yeah, happy to. And yeah, so thank you, Alison. Thank you for listening, everyone. And yeah, grateful to answer any questions. Also happy to get into more detail. But really, that equity is critically important. We realize there's kind of two areas of equity we focus on. One is financial equity that I'll speak to now, because I think that's what this question gets at. But we're also equally focused on human racial equity, land health equity as well. And that kind of manifests in our model in different ways that I'm also happy to talk about. But to the financial equity piece that, right, the reality is that many farmers need and use the real estate as collateral to access capital needed for improvements, long-term farm operations, annual needs, cash flow needs. Like, we recognize those needs, and we recognize that this model of removing the largest asset, the real estate, from the farmer's books makes it more difficult for a farmer to hold collateral and access capital and build equity. Yet we believe that the model of leveraging and extracting from real estate land to get capital, only to at the end of career life have to sell that off to pay off debt, and in many times leading to development of that land, extraction of that land falling out of agriculture, is not a long-term solution. We did not want to create a model that was perpetuating a system that we feel is not a long-term solution or a just way to treat land or farms. So we took a bigger picture approach, and what we do is feel that the land shouldn't be something that is simply a commoditized asset in the equation, that it's better removed from that equation, and that farmers building equity through their business and other means is how to do that. So, how that plays out in the model is that the lease, one aspect of the lease is that it can be a ground lease, where just like community land trusts use local in Vermont and across the country, that a farmer holding the lease can own that building's infrastructure assets. So investments a farmer makes into the land, in buildings, infrastructure, other assets, are theirs that they own. And so, when they go to exit the business, they're no longer selling the land, the real estate, that is held in the trust, but they are selling buildings, infrastructure, other business values and assets that they might have. So they're building equity, and they're gaining from investments they make in the property in that way. So that's one part of financial equity building for a farmer, is their investments in are theirs, and they can capture a resale and a kind of exit and gaining capital when they leave the farm business. And so that lowers the cost for a new farmer coming in. And yet it still provides some asset value for farmer exiting. another part of equity building is that the 501c2 structure legally allows more flexibility when thinking about things like I mentioned, like prescribing farming practices, for example, or who gets access to land through a lease. It also allows more flexibility when thinking about a lease rate. So back to the slide where I mentioned that, appraised market value of farmland continues to increase year over year and has for several decades now, to the point that it is far out of sync with what agricultural production can afford. Whether it's commodity agriculture on larger scale acreage in the Midwest, or it's small diversified regenerative farms local to us, agriculture struggles to afford the market value of farmland, and conservation easements are a big benefit to that. Conservation easements and OPAVs are an even bigger benefit to that, but it's still a struggle. And conservation easements and OPAVs really don't exist beyond a few examples, in tandem in the way they do in Vermont. So, on a national scale, that's not a resource many have. So the reality is that, farmland market value is out of sync with agriculture. And, it's easy to draw the conclusion that market-based lease rates are also out of sync because they're driven by similar market pressures. So the 501c2 structure allows more latitude in setting lease rates. So we set lease rates based on what is financially viable for the farm business, and also recognizing that a farmer who is furthering the mission of the commons and the trusts, say in building soil, in certain stewardship practices, in certain food production for food access needs for the community, that can lower the lease cost for them. So, they can be rewarded for certain farming and kind of stewardship practices and build equity that way through financial savings and a lower lease rate. So those are really the two kind of equity components for private equity for farmers. The other equity component to touch upon that is not for individual farmers, it's not private equity building, but we feel it's really community equity building that I hope you appreciate, is that each commons is local community-centered entity that is holding those assets. And so it holds ownership title to the farm. And so it holds that as an asset. And as it, obtains ownership title to other farms, it's adding assets in as it takes philanthropic capital to invest in renewable energy, say, and produces energy through solar panels. That's an asset of the commons. So those, assets produce revenue. Like the affordable lease rate is something that the commons collects the revenue for. If there's renewable energy that's generating income or reducing energy costs, that's a benefit to the commons as a whole. So the commons then collects that revenue, and the commons is a limited scope entity, the 501c2, as I mentioned. So it's not getting involved in programmatic work. It's not having other activities of a nonprofit. Again, we feel there's a lot of great nonprofits doing great work. We're not trying to replicate or compete what they do. We're trying to be additive to that. And we're trying to really focus on the ownership structure. So being a limited scope entity, the 501c2 commons can have a limited cost structure. So it collects revenue in, and it can then reinvest that capital back into the farms it owns, and in projects that local commons decides how it reinvests the revenue back in. But it's really a way for that revenue collected to be recycled back into the farms to improve soil health, food production, and other things in a way that stops the cycle of farmers paying a unaffordable mortgage to a bank that is not local to them to never see benefit of that money again. What this does is resets that financial equation to make it affordable for a farmer, and then the money they're paying, they see recycled back into the farms they're on. So that, not equity to them privately, but equity to the whole system in that way.
Thank you for that. We've got a question from David Zuckerman and then John Roberts.
All right. Thank you. And I really appreciate this conversation. And I live pretty close to bread and butter farms. So I'm really excited about what they're doing. We bought our farm through Land Trust and with an OPAV. I was really glad you mentioned that. For those that don't know, that's an option to purchase at ag value by the sort of land trust owners. In our case, that's how we were able to buy our $1 million piece of land for, $275,000 or so. But it also means that when we sell the farm, the trust has the opportunity to buy the land at ag value plus a small inflation rate over time. So I'm curious how that's sort of similar or different to what agrarian trust would do, because it seems like a very similar model where as a farmer, I was able to greatly lower my annual capital cost on the land side. I'm also not going to get the value, quote, the value out of the land, but I do get the appreciation of the buildings and so forth that we invest in and any construction we put on. So I'm also really excited to hear about this because I think it could be done in conjunction and partnership. When I saw you have FSA involved and others and the loaning agents at the federal level, that also can really lower interest rates. And I'm wondering if there's been any creativity in thinking about even longer sort of mortgages, where if this is really thinking about the more 50 to 200 year vision, whether or not a landowner might think about their own family and their eventual inheritance to their children and say, you know what, I would sell land into an agrarian trust on, say, a 50 or a 75 year mortgage, and maybe even creatively through FSA, and I have no idea if they would even entertain this idea, have those first years be at first 10 years at 1%, following years 2%, and maybe it's years 50 to 75 it's at 4%, because they of course have to eventually get the capital back on their low interest loan, but then it would be a higher rate on a much lower remaining capital. And I just don't know if some of that kind of creative financing has come into play. I did have a couple other just technical questions about, like, what does chemical free mean? Because as an organic farm, we use inputs. Technically, as a chemistry minor, those inputs are chemicals. And what is walkable distance to a school? So those two are very brief ones, but on a technical basis, I'm wondering about the financing, because to me, it just seems like almost always it comes down to the money. And is there any way to stretch that out to make it possible for those base costs to be lower? And I had one last piece, which was whether or not some of the value in these operations, like I know Bread and Butter has a big CSA, we've had a relatively large CSA, but if there can be value in that sort of knowledge capital and customer base capital that exists if you were to transition an operation to another farmer or practitioner of the land, that's the community asset that you have as an already built base, and where there's a value allocation to that in a capital transition for the farmer. Sorry.
Yeah, so great questions. Let me try to move through them. Let me know if I miss any. But so to start with kind of the more direct, so chemical free and walkable to a school, like those are kind of broader concepts that we as a trust and the commons hold. They are then locally defined by that specific commons. So, I say walkable to a school. In the 17 farms we have, a number of them are less than half mile to a school now. So whether future farms have to fall within that or not is more a local decision, but that's kind of, we want a majority of farms to be, accessible, walkable to a school. One part of the country to another, walkable is going to look different because of climate and, landscape and such. Right. And the chemical free, the specifics of that are defined by the local commons, and it's, there's, we as the National Trust are not trying to be too prescriptive, but we are trying to set a certain framework of expectations that then we expect the local commons to be more prescriptive, define those, and then kind of they're responsible to report back to the trust on those. So we, have a kind of oversight approval process, but it's up to the local commons working with those farms to define what that specifically looks like. To the OPAV, that the financial picture of this in some ways is similar to an OPAV, that it's lowering those costs of transition, acquisition on one side and sale on the other, to the point that it's more affordable. What I found years ago in bringing the OPAV to New Hampshire and working with Vermont Land Trust and John Ramsey at the time, and then working with the Massachusetts APR program, was, both of those had been in existence for well over a decade when we kind of explored moving this to New Hampshire. And at that point, it was, I was running the foundation. We were just working with one other land trust, so there was more flexibility. It wasn't kind of looking to get state adoption of this in New Hampshire. So the realities we saw were that the OPAV is, doesn't deal with whole farm affordability. So it makes the land affordable, but it may or may not make the house and other infrastructure. And there are some kind of, restrictions on size of improvements allowed or size of housing in some cases, not in others. But so this model is looking at the whole property, not just the raw land. Back to that comment I had about we're looking at a way to look at both community land trusts that focus on affordable housing and built environment, and conservation land trusts that look at land and say, there's a way to bring the two together. So we're looking at affordability of the whole farm picture. The other part of an OPAV is that it's only a mechanism at time of transfer. Like there's some examples where it does deal with, land has to be in active agriculture, or there's steps that can be taken, but it is not as prescriptive outside of, and it doesn't allow those controls for land trust outside of time of transfer, where this is a kind of an annual level of controls to make sure, farming is taking place. The lease allows for flexibility of life events and climate events and such to allow, breaks in farming, but it allows a constant kind of relationship and engagement to make sure it's carrying forward. I'd also share too, there's several examples around the country of land trusts that have tried for years, or taken some projects on where they're prescribing farming practices, say in an easement, and sort of circle back to the OPAV, that conservation easements that tie an OPAV to them. A conservation easement is a permanent document, and to change a conservation easement is a significant hurdle with number of approvals and parties and costs needed, and it should be, because it's intending to permanently prohibit certain uses on land, which is beneficial. Farming is dynamic though, so thinking about fitting farming that's dynamic and has to adapt daily, right, to weather and markets and a variety of conditions, to a permanent conservation easement that is not adaptable on a daily or annual basis, there's a disconnect there. So a number of land trusts that have tried to fit, requiring organic agriculture in conservation easements have stepped away from that over time, because it's not a good fit, because national organic standards have changed significantly over the decades, and what we once wanted to wed ourselves to, we may not want to anymore. So the ability for an easement to be adaptable and yet have multiple parties involved is a difference, and the ability to engage annually in that. To the finance side, there's no innovation presently with FSA and others. We'd like to get to that point and have discussions on that. I've presented on this model a few times in the last year to USDA staff and FSA staff. This model for us is a diversified capital stack. We're using philanthropic capital from a variety of sources. We're also using investment capital. So some investment capital through traditional sources like shared, but other investment capital through partner CDFI organizations that are taking in more flexible capital from, private investors or from foundations, PRI money or others. So there's more flexibility to look at extending out term or different kind of structures to that. So our hope is that over time, we can kind of model different investment debt structures that maybe others, traditional lenders, would be more open to. But at present, we're just in that stage of beginning to model out, different structures in that. The other point, though, is right, to valuing kind of knowledge and community wealth and customer base, so part of that is we would love to see that too. The business side is not our focus. The business is a private entity and it transfers from one private party to the next, and we don't engage in that. The business is the leaseholding entity, and we have a lease relationship with them, and the leaseholding business owner, are part of the board of the commons. So there's a interconnected relationship in that, but this model is not interjecting financially or otherwise in the business. But to that point, that because we are focused on ownership, and because we're working with a lease, there is much greater flexibility. A number of projects we're working with have exiting landowners who are selling or donating or a bargain sale of property into the commons, and then they're retaining a life estate to continue to live on the property for a number of years, and their sale of the property is over a multi-year payment structure. They might have a lump sum up front and then a multi-year payment structure over time that allows them to stay involved and pass on their knowledge and wisdom, and new farmer to come in and gain from that, and to really extend out that kind of financial cost of land transfer from one party to the next in a way that's, some of that is investment capital, more of that is just how we're paying out the exiting farmer and how the entering farmer's lease can help support some of that, say. But in that or go ahead.
Hey, I just want to, I don't mean to interrupt, but I know that there's a lot of richness in that conversation, and there's a few other questions. Since we're short on time, I'm wondering if we could move on to at least one other that was really interesting.
Yeah, thanks.
I saw one from John Roberts, and the question was, what is the process by which beginning farmers may try to join the Agrarian Commons? And in Vermont, we don't have a process yet because the land is coming in with a farm that will be leasing the land. But I expect that what will happen eventually is when there are new parcels that don't have existing lease relationships, there will be some sort of process by which we identify an application process or something like that. Ian may be able to speak to what's going on in other places around the country, because they may be further ahead. I know that one aspect is an emphasis on thinking about people who have historically been marginalized and unable to own land based on various discrimination, and therefore thinking about land justice as one of the lenses when figuring out which farmers will be in a lease relationship with the Agrarian Commons is probably one of the priorities that will be considered. Ian, would you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so I just share that the process is, so we, the trust, and each local Agrarian Commons is, they're separate entities and have kind of this connection and relationship. So the process for any farmer, farmland owner or farmer seeking farmland would start with a conversation, and from that conversation, sharing some mapping and details on your farm that you either own or that you're seeking, and then we can kind of evaluate if it's a good fit from there, and both kind of us, the trust nationally, and whichever the local commons is where that land might be. So it's a conversation, and really kind of a land assessment is where things start. And our goal is to, all farms fit within kind of the goals that I described, and at the same time, the farms are quite diverse. So our goal is to have this model work for many farms and many communities across the country. So it's not one type of production or one system of operations. Like, there's a lot of flexibility in farm type and acreage size and such. So we're open to many different farms, and it starts with that conversation. And just seeing another question that's kind of related to this is that the leaseholding, the farm operations, a leaseholding farm, really differ quite a bit. So there's for-profit farms, there's nonprofit farms, there's cooperatives, there's a county government, so there's multiple different kind of legal structures for what that farm is. Farm that's entering into the commons, and then farm that's getting lease tenure as well. And we're open to all types of legal structure and all types of kind of farm, from the larger production farm to the more community subsistence farm, to the more kind of educational community kind of event space, education, learning center. Like, there's real diversity across the farms we're working with, and that's part of the goal as well.
Yeah, there's this question from Jillian. Can you talk about the relationship of cooperative housing and cooperative farming in this model? And I think that's what you were just alluding to, is that reference to cooperative farming. So yeah, one common, I think, kind of just assumption or misconception about the agrarian commons model is that when people hear commons, they may think about like communes and a more collective, intentional community where place and work and community and housing are kind of all in one. But as Ian's been describing, the commons is simply the nonprofit holding the land, the deed to the land, and then it has a relationship with the farms that is a lease relationship. So those farm enterprises, and Ian just described the diversity of what they could be, is a simple lease relationship. And in terms of the housing, my understanding is that housing would be potentially have some affordability related to an easement of some sort. Ian may be able to expand on this, but it would be more of a traditional private house purchase, for example, as opposed to a cooperative housing that is linked with the land, but that there would be a priority for people affiliated with the farm enterprise to have access to that housing. Ian, is that kind of a slightly on target characterization?
Yeah. So, and just to expand on that, that really, one qualifying aspect for farms for us is that we feel that farming requires people, and that people require housing. So, we're not interested in just raw land, disconnected from housing and infrastructure and buildings, because our focus is on, people's connection to land through agriculture. So, all involves housing in some way. Whether that housing is privately owned through a ground lease on the land, whether it's owned by the commons and rented to people, whether there's a combination of the two with multiple homes on the property, it looks different from one farm to the next we're working with. But the common thread is that we see the need for people to have housing, and we recognize that people are the farmers, and farmland is activated by farmers. So, they all have to be connected.
Thank you, Ian. Thanks for answering all those really engaging questions. We'd like to take the time, because we're looking at the clock at 7 o'clock. And if anybody had any questions related specifically to any of the ACORN work or any other general comments or ideas related to what we spoke about tonight, we'd love to hear from you. And if not,
Well, I I could ask another question on that side, but I want to make sure that somebody else gets a chance first.
It's looking pretty silent, so feel free to go for it.
I'm curious whether ACORN has thought about a position that could be almost a social media or farm support person in that regard. Because I know as our farm, usually we're working nonstop to create food and just deal with the straight up normal marketing and distribution. To add a social media component, some people are wizards at that, but many farmers aren't, particularly older farmers. And whether or not there's a possible contract type position there where no farmer needs a full-time position, that would be too expensive. So that was one thought. And or sort of CSA / financial management software development consultant as well, where again, there are programs out there, but they often take 3 or 4% of the sales, which is a pretty significant portion when it comes to the margins on farms. And then lastly, I was actually wondering whether a tour to farms could happen in a COVID environment, because it's still all outdoors. We have restaurants that can sell food, so why a farm couldn't distribute food if they were properly trained to have those samples available? So 3 different ACORN questions. Again, maybe they don't all have to be answered now, but this conversation has been incredibly stimulating for me on both fronts. So I appreciate that for my entertainment, if nobody else's.
Thanks, David. I'm glad you're engaged. I can take on the social media question. It was something that came up at our retreat this summer. We acknowledge that we could go that route, do more on the marketing and communications for all farmers. We would need funding for that, and right now that's really not on the table. But it's certainly something that we're interested in, and there's a few board members that are also interested in it.
Well, can I just point out, like, as a farm, if I could pay like $2,000 in, along with 15 other farms paying $2,000 in for that service, it wouldn't be something we need donated, but it's just a sort of a contract thing.
Okay, yeah, something we can talk about at ACORN's board meeting.
I made that number up, so I don't know if that's the right number.
No, that's great. That's not what I understood the question. So thank you for clarifying. Definitely something that we could talk about at our board meeting on Monday. The CSA software management, are you talking about an e-commerce platform?
Well, somewhat. I mean, I know I have QuickBooks and I've got members, and I'm trying to do an atypical CSA model, because the old style of you get what you get and you got to come this 1-2 hour window is really falling out of favor, because the world of convenience is more valuable than the world of your local connection. And I can get into more detail with you about that, but it's just connecting all the software that is not something that most of us as farmers are technologically savvy with. So again, it's technical support for farms doing local marketing and local value, which again makes some of these issues that the Agrarian Trust is looking towards, which is making that farming economically viable for farmers in the long run in a way that is annually economically remunerative, as opposed to capitally intensive economically remunerative, because they're not going to get that money back out on the back end of the capital side on the land.
That's something that we'll have to think about, that hasn't come up in our prior conversations. The tour to farms during COVID is a really good question, and I'd like Al or perhaps Jonathan to speak to that, because they're really the leaders of that initiative.
Yeah, I can handle that a little bit, Jonathan. Feel free to chime in. I know we're kind of going over time here, but yeah, we certainly talked about it, David. You know, at the height of COVID, we were thinking, oh, things will be fine by September. Let's just go ahead with it. And we just weren't. I mean, we talk about being nimble. We just weren't quite nimble enough to to pull all that together. Obviously there was so much going on when unfortunately we had to cancel with a lot of farms. And, we're talking about a self-guided thing, where you can have the route and figure out stopping in, but we really value that community, that day, where everybody is out there going to farms, just like your farm and the last resort. I mean, it's a great success. And, when you have 200 people, all stopping in at farms, we hopefully want to repeat that event at some level. So I guess we'll see. It's still on our radar for sure.
Yeah, I was thinking future. I could totally see why this year. There's just so much unknown. Makes perfect sense.
Thanks, Al, and thanks, David, for those questions. Annie Harlow, who's on the ACORN Board of Directors, would like to say something.
There we go. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. It's been really great. And I also want to toss out to any of the farmers and or value-added food businesses that, as Lindsay mentioned earlier, we are considering having some sort of Zoom trainings, workshops. We used to have them in person at the UVM Extension office in Middlebury. And I'd love to just put it out there that if you think it would be valuable to have ACORN sponsor some Zoom workshops, very targeted conversations, shoot us some information at info@acornvt.org, and we'll consider that. Obviously, we like to stay engaged with the farmers. That's what we do, and the value-added food producers. And in these uncertain times, it's really about bandwidth and interest. So just let us know. So it's kind of an ask of any of you guys that are in the meeting tonight, that if you think you'd be interested, let us know. So thank you. And again, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Annie. There's just one more comment from Peggy Holden, who is from Farm and Field Notes, and she's also doing a lot of storytelling and marketing around specific local farms. I've had a few good conversations with her, so I just wanted to highlight that she's here and listening, and agrees that shared resources is a fabulous idea. And I also wanted to let everyone know that we are well over our time. Feel free to stay on and keep conversing and having these conversations. Feel free to leave. We're not going to be offended. It's late, it's dark. If you are interested in checking out the app, I think the students are still online. Yep, they're still here. So we could also screen share and show the app. So feel free to keep hanging out, or have a great night. If you are interested in seeing the app, let me know. And thanks, Hannah. She's expressing gratitude for the online market. It was great knowing ACORN was in our corner. That was a really stressful time earlier this year. We're happy to help. And David, thank you again. Yep. Okay. Al's got his hand up. Clapping. Thank you. Yep. Round of applause for everybody that grows food and is helping our local food system. Thanks for hosting. Thank you, Ian and Alison. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you so much. And to all the ACORN team to pull this together. It really does take a village to make these things work.
Great. Alison's dropped her comments or her email in the chat. And it looks like I do have at least one taker for the app. So Zach and Ben, if you're interested in hanging out and showing that to us. Thank you, Alice. Nice connecting with you as well. Hey, Zach. Do you want to attempt to screen share?
Yeah, we can give it a shot.
Amen.
Yeah. Is it working, Lindsay?
Yeah, well, it says has started screen sharing, which is what happened to me.
Okay. I don't think it's working. Yeah, no, you have to do it. How do I do it?
I'm wondering if it has something to do with having multiple people on Zoom, because it worked when I just had 2 people on Zoom.
If this doesn't work, I can just do it from my computer and not from a phone. Okay, let's do from my computer.
Perfect.
Okay. Do you want to narrate? I'll just
Sure, I can narrate.
manipulate.
So as I was mentioning, when you open the app, it takes you to where your current location is with that blue dot. And then you can scroll, you can use the map to search. So you can scroll, zoom out or move around with your fingers like you would on a Google map. You can click on any of those green icons to bring up a farm. Hidden Valley Maple, and then you can scroll across and it'll show you what else is in that local area. Or you can drag the bar that's on the bottom up, and that'll show you another view. This is actually an outdated version, I think, Zach, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so this actually shows you the products now. So I think Zach's showing the back end technology, which is also very cool. So that just shows you the farms that are closest to you based on your current location. So then you can drag that bar back down, Zach, and show the search function, the search bar functionality if folks were looking for, yep, Happy Valley. If they knew, they'd heard of Happy Valley Orchard, but they didn't quite know where it was, and they could click on that. You can click on the tile. Oh, too fast. Okay, now we're going to eggs. Scroll across to find perhaps a farm store that has, yeah, Cracked an Egg has a website. So you could open that up and click on the site. And then it takes you directly to the farmer's site. So you can see what other offerings they have, place an order, or if you want to go back to the app, you can also get directions directly to the farm stand. So you click on directions, you choose Apple Maps, or mine has Google Maps. And then you'll get directions exactly from where you are to the farm, which is pretty cool. So this is really meant for both residents and tourists. You can go back to the main farm and try out the filter function to the top there. And you say you pick dairy. So this has all the product categories and then different services. And then maybe we want to do direct dairy, Zach. Also, like I said before, you could choose CSA, pick your own. And then it'll show you the closest farms that have direct dairy. And I don't know if Hannah's still on, but Hannah was here before. Yeah, she's still on. So there's Blue Ledge Farm. So you could click on Blue Ledge Farm and it opens up. And again, you could scroll down and see all of the information for that specific farm, including what stores Hannah has their cheese in. Or you can also go to their website at the top. And you can also favorite. I thought you'd like that, Hannah. You could also favorite it, so if you can find it for later. And we don't save any of your information. This is all stored locally on your phone. So that's the quick and dirty version of it. It's nice to see it live. It really brings it alive, I think. And I'm bummed I couldn't show it earlier, but we're really excited about it. And yeah, oh, here's the content at the bottom, the middle button down there where it says ACORN. This is going to be custom content from our website and a blog that we're going to be writing. And also there will be space for advertising for local businesses and any kind of relevant content that is applicable at that time. So seasonal recipes, what's growing, where to get, seeds, anything like that that's relevant. Yeah. Any questions? I know I went through that pretty quickly. Okay, so we're hoping to have this live probably by December, and it'll be live on both the Google and Apple app stores. And do you guys have anything to share, Ben or Zach? No. Okay.
Hey, Lindsay. This
Yeah.
is Lee Dogowitz at Cooperative Insurance. So I'm just curious, how many people or how many farms do you have on the app right now?
So we took all the information that we have for our local food and farm guide, which has 237 farms.
Okay. And how are you driving more people to the app? Not from search, but farms to the app to be able to post.
How are you getting farms on the app?
Yeah.
So connecting with farmers is one of the hardest things. I don't know if Susan Smiley is still on the call, but she's still here. She spends every spring, many hours every spring, calling and emailing farmers directly to update their listings. And anytime any of us drive around and find a new farm, we'll get their contact information. It's really a grassroots effort. John Roberts, I don't know if he's still on with the Champlain Valley Farmer Coalition. We've asked him to let his farmers know. There's the Vermont Farm to Plate Network, there's NOFA Vermont, there's all the different farming organizations and service providers that once this is live, we're going to ask, other farmers in the area. And there's no reason this needs to be restricted to the Champlain Valley. This can really be statewide.
Okay, so here's what I'm thinking. So cooperative insurance, we insure farms. We probably have somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 farms we insure. So I have a fairly robust database of farms, and I want to try and support, getting this online for you. So that both those items, one, the financial piece to support getting online, but also, trying to figure out how I can help you spread the word through our connections already with our insureds.
That's super generous. Thank you. That would be great if you could, reach that list of 3,000 farms. We would be really excited about that, and the financial piece too, obviously.
I mean, so on your presentation you showed $500. It's $500 to get this online.
That was an example. That was specifically our legal costs.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not the total cost. That was just we didn't want to put like $10,000 or $5,000 because I didn't know.
Understood.
Yeah, there's definitely more cost than just the 500. But thank you for asking.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, maybe we can talk offline about what the total financial costs are of it. So.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lee.
Yep.
And Hannah, glad to have you here. And she's saying maybe we should connect with some social media bloggers to promote to customers. Absolutely. Yeah. Once this is rolled out and we have all the, the bells and whistles and the legal stuff cleared, we'll do our best to promote this every which way. And yeah, any help from you guys as well. I know you all the farmers and food producers have your own really awesome customer base, and anybody that, is buying your cheese might be interested in helping to promote this as well. And then the co-op is here, and I know Emily has a really good engaged customer base. Yeah, so it's all about our community partners for sure.
Great.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks, Hannah and Ben.
My pleasure.
And Jane for staying on this late. That's great.
All right, I'll be in contact.
All right, thank you, Lee.
Yep.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye. Hey. Yeah, Hannah got a lot of traffic to her tiny stand this year, farm stand. People are looking for unique experiences on the farms. Absolutely. Yeah, I think we'll be in good shape for next year. I think once all of these digital things, I can't think of the word, digital things are ready for next year, I think we'll be able to connect with a lot of people who are eager to get out of their house and do these COVID safe, if we're still looking at COVID, even in the spring, experiences. Yeah. It's good to have you on here, Hannah. Oh, there you are. Nice to see you. You're muted. Let me unmute you. Okay, there you go. Nope.
No way. I think even after COVID ends, I think that, I don't know if I think it will still continue. I think people will be looking for like authenticity, maybe in a way that they haven't before. I don't know. I tend to be an optimistic, glass half full kind of person, but it's like, I just feel like we seem to have turned a corner in terms of what we value, and we'll see, but I think the on-farm sales maybe will continue. Our business, I think we'll end up having one of our best years ever. So,
wow.
Yeah. So, I don't know. It'll be interesting, but opportunities, lessons we've learned.
Absolutely. This year's all about lessons learned.
Yes.
Being flexible.
That's right. Well,
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much. It was a really interesting night. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks for being
Thank you
here.
for coming.
Bye.
Bye.
Hi, everybody.
Bye, Emily.
Can Lindsay, will you stay on for a minute?
Sure. Yeah, I think I'm a co-host, so it'll stay on. And that's my mom, and she's just hanging out. Mom, you can sign off if you want.
Hi, Kathy.
I'm going to stop the recording.